My name is David, and I'm 28 years old. This story happened about 2 years ago, back when I was trying out Tinder for the first time. I've always been a pretty shy guy, not great at meeting people in person, so one of my friends suggested I try dating apps. Tinder was just starting to get really popular, so I figured, why not? It seemed easy enough. I set up a profile with a few pictures from my travels to places like China, France, and Germany. For my hobbies, I listed cooking. I love trying out different cuisines, hiking, and running marathons. After a week or so of swiping and messaging, I was getting nowhere. Either I wasn't getting matches, or conversations fizzled out. I was about to delete the app when I matched with a girl named Felicia. Felicia was exactly my type. She had this goth look, dark hair, piercing eyes, and a style that was unique but not over the top. Her profile said she loved traveling, eating out, hiking, and running, basically everything I'm into. So I messaged her with a simple, "Hey, how's it going?" To my surprise, she replied almost instantly. We hit it off right away, talking about everything from favorite foods to bucket list travel destinations. After a couple of days, we decided to meet up in person. For our first date, we agreed on a Mexican restaurant not too far from where I live. I got there about 10 minutes early and waited. When 10 minutes turned into 15, I started to think I'd been stood up. Just as I was about to leave, she walked in. She looked exactly like her pictures, which was a huge relief, no catfishing here. She apologized for being late, and we sat down and started talking. Dinner went great. We had a lot in common, and the conversation flowed naturally. We talked about traveling, swapped cooking tips, and even joked about the awkwardness of online dating. By the end of the night, we both agreed we'd like to see each other again. For our second date, Felicia suggested a Chinese restaurant she liked. Dinner was just as good as the first date, until the very end, when she asked me something unexpected. "Have you ever been to an abandoned place before?" she asked casually. I told her no, but that I wasn't opposed to the idea. She smiled and said, "We should go. There's an abandoned mall on the edge of town. It used to be really popular, but after COVID, it shut down and never reopened. I've been there a couple of times. It's creepy, but cool." I'll admit, I was hesitant, but I didn't want to seem boring. So I agreed. Later that week, I met her at her place, and we drove to the abandoned mall together. When we got there, the place looked exactly how you'd imagine an abandoned mall would: broken windows, boarded up doors, graffiti everywhere. The parking lot was overgrown with weeds, and the air felt strangely heavy. We parked the car and made our way inside through a gap in one of the boards. Inside, it was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of broken glass under our feet and the occasional creak of the building settling. We walked around, shining our phone flashlights into dark corners and peeking into empty stores. Felicia seemed completely at ease, chatting about how the mall used to be packed with people back in the day. That's when we heard it, voices. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I saw the look on Felicia's face. She heard it too. We froze, listening. The voices were coming from one of the larger stores up ahead. It sounded like three men talking, but we couldn't make out what they were saying. "That's weird," Felicia whispered. "I've never seen anyone else here before." We should have turned around and left right then, but curiosity got the better of us. We crept closer, trying to hear what they were saying. As we got closer, their words became clearer. They were talking about setting up some kind of operation in the mall. Drugs, maybe? Or something worse. Whatever it wasn't good. Felicia grabbed my arm and whispered, "We need to go." I nodded, and we started backing away as quietly as we could. But in the dark, I wasn't watching where I was going. My foot caught on a trash can, and it toppled over with a loud crash. The voices stopped. "Who's there?" one of the men shouted. My heart was pounding. Felicia and I looked at each other, and without a word, we bolted. I didn't look back to see if they were following. I didn't want to know. We sprinted through the mall, dodging debris and broken furniture until we reached the gap we'd come through. We scrambled out and ran to her car. She fumbled with the keys, finally unlocking the doors, and we jumped in. She started the car and peeled out of the parking lot. We didn't say a word until we were halfway back to her place. Finally, she broke the silence. "What do you think they were doing there?" I shook my head. "I don't know, and I don't want to know." We never went back to that mall, and we've never talked about it since. Felicia and I are still dating, but every now and then, I think about that night and wonder what would have happened if they'd caught us. It's just a memory now, but it's one I'll never forget. Hi, my name is John, and I'm 29 years old. This story happened a few years ago, back when I was still single. It's just a memory now, but every time I think about it, it gives me chills. At the time, I had been out of a relationship for a couple of months. My ex and I broke up after a stupid argument about pets of all things. I'm a dog person, and she wasn't. One thing led to another, and it escalated into a full-blown fight. After we split, I went through a rough patch. I was depressed for a few weeks but eventually started feeling ready to date again. Like most people, I turned to dating apps. I set up a profile, added some decent pictures, and started swiping. After a couple of days, I matched with this girl named Sarah. She had blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a warm smile. Definitely my type. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. She seemed fun and friendly, and we had a lot in common. After a couple of days of messaging, she invited me to a party. At first, I thought it was a little strange for a first date, but she reassured me it would be casual and that some of her friends would be there. I figured, why not? It's good to try new things, right? On the night of the party, I got ready, took a shower, shaved, threw on a decent outfit, the usual. I texted her to let her know I'd be there in about 30 minutes since the location she gave me was on the outskirts of town. She replied right away, saying she was just leaving her apartment and would meet me there. As I drove, the area got sketchier the closer I got. The roads were riddled with potholes, the houses looked run down, and streetlights were either flickering or completely out. Still, I figured maybe it was just an older part of town. When I finally reached the location, it was a large, shabby building with flashing LED lights visible through the windows. There were a handful of cars parked outside, and I assumed the party was in full swing. But as I pulled up, I got this weird feeling in my gut, a sense that something wasn't right. I'm not usually the paranoid type, but the vibe of the place unsettled me. On a whim, I decided to park my car a block away, where it wouldn't be visible from the building. I texted Sarah, saying my car had broken down and I had taken an Uber, so I'd be there in about 5 minutes. She replied, "No problem," which put me at ease for a moment. I started walking toward the building, but slowly, keeping my eyes open for anything unusual. That's when I noticed something odd. There were 7 cars parked outside, but I distinctly remembered seeing 8 when I first arrived. Maybe someone left? It didn't seem like a big deal, but it gave me an uneasy feeling. I couldn't shake the thought that something about this whole situation felt off. When I got closer, I circled around the side of the building instead of heading straight in. I don't know what made me do it, maybe it was that gut feeling again. As I approached one of the windows, I peeked inside. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. The room was lit with bright, flashing LED lights, but there were no girls in sight. Instead, it was a group of men, maybe 5 or 6, all wearing masks. They weren't partying. They were just standing around, talking. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but then one of them spoke up loud enough for me to catch it. "He should be here any minute now." He. They were talking about me. My heart started racing. I ducked down beneath the window, trying to process what I'd just heard. This wasn't a party. This was a setup. I didn't know what they wanted, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I took a deep breath and quietly started making my way back to the street. My hands were shaking as I texted Sarah, "Hey, something came up. I'm not going to make it tonight." She didn't reply, and I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. When I reached my car, I jumped in and locked the doors. As I started the engine, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw two of the masked men step outside the building, looking around. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't wait to see if they spotted me. I floored it and didn't stop driving until I was back home. That night, I deleted my Tinder account. I never heard from Sarah again, and I've always wondered if that was even her real name. Looking back, I'm grateful I trusted my gut and didn't walk straight into that building. Whatever those guys had planned, it wasn't good. Now, it's just a story I tell to warn people to be careful with online dating. Trust your instincts, and if something feels off, it probably is. I'll never forget how close I came to walking into what could have been a very dangerous situation. Hi, my name is Jose, and I'm 23 years old. I'm sharing this because it's something that happened to me recently, and honestly, I'm still shaken up about it. A little background on me: I'm just a regular guy who's trying to get his life together. I've only dated one girl, back in high school, but we ended things because we were heading in different directions. Fast forward a few years, I graduated from college, landed a stable job, and rented a nice little house for myself. Life was starting to feel steady, and I figured it was time to put myself out there again and try dating. Given how big online dating is these days, I decided to give it a shot. I spent a few nights scrolling through different apps like Tinder and OkCupid, but eventually, I stuck with Bumble. It seemed like the right fit for me. Now, here's where things get a little strange. I matched with someone I instantly recognized, a girl I used to have a huge crush on back in college. Her name was Jessica. She was blonde with warm brown eyes and thick brows that somehow made her even more attractive. She was one of the most hardworking and kind people I'd ever met. Back in college, I never had the guts to ask her out, but now, seeing her profile on Bumble felt like fate. I swiped right as fast as I could, and to my surprise, it was an instant match. I couldn't believe it. I started typing right away, asking her how she'd been and reminiscing about the few times we'd worked on group projects together or bumped into each other at campus events. But here's where the first red flag came up: she claimed not to remember me at all. Not even vaguely. I figured she was joking, but even when I mentioned specific things, like the club we were both part of or the class we had together, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Still, she was friendly, and the conversation flowed easily. Before I knew it, she suggested we meet up. She proposed coming to my place the next night for a casual evening, Netflix and chill, basically. I was over the moon. Jessica, the girl I couldn't even dream of asking out in college, wanted to come over. The next day, about 30 minutes before she was supposed to show up, I was scrolling through Instagram to kill time. I followed Jessica's account, so I decided to check out her profile. That's when I noticed something odd. She had just posted a story. She was on vacation in Paris, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. My stomach dropped. I immediately messaged her on Instagram, asking her why she'd been talking to me on Bumble if she wasn't even in the country. She replied almost instantly, confused. She told me she didn't even have a Bumble account. At this point, I was freaking out. I sent her screenshots of our conversation, and she was just as shocked as I was. She told me to report the account and warned me to be careful. That's when it hit me: I had just given my home address to a complete stranger. I was panicking, pacing around the house, unsure of what to do. Should I leave? Stay? Call the police? Before I could decide, I heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. It came from the kitchen. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone and bolted to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. I whispered to the operator what was happening, and she assured me that officers were on their way. As I stayed on the line, I heard heavy footsteps downstairs. They weren't trying to be quiet. In fact, it sounded like there were two people rummaging through my things. I could hear drawers opening and furniture being moved. Then, one of them called out, "We know you're here." My heart felt like it was going to explode. They started checking the rooms one by one. Doors creaked open, and I could hear them getting closer. The operator told me the police were only a few minutes away, but those minutes felt like an eternity. Finally, they reached my bedroom door. The doorknob rattled, and then they started pounding on it, yelling for me to come out. I shouted back that the police were on their way, hoping it would scare them off. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, I heard them running downstairs. A few seconds later, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police arrived just in time. They caught the two men as they were trying to escape through the back door. Later, I learned that these guys had been using fake profiles on dating apps to lure people into giving out their addresses. They'd then break in, tie up their victims, and rob them blind. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if the police hadn't shown up when they did. This experience still haunts me. I was just looking for someone to connect with, and instead, I ended up in one of the scariest situations of my life. Now, I'm a lot more cautious about who I talk to online. This is just a memory now, but it's one I'll never forget.